I was investigating the death of one of our lawyers at the firm, Gus Samuelson. He was healthy, mid-50s, and he died just like that. It was like the snap of a finger. He's here, and then he's gone. Really shook all of us at Hanley & Hanley. We weren't a big firm, about 25 lawyers, so losing Gus felt like we were losing family. Gus was in the prime of his career, too. He was just given one of those Best Lawyer awards. The local newspaper recently did a profile piece on him, too. He got his photo in the paper and everything. That was only 80 days ago. So far, my investigation didn't really uncover much. I talked to the police, who said they had no reason to investigate. They said the death wasn't suspicious. I said, how could that be? The guy dropped dead just like that. They said people die all the time, and Gus's family didn't authorize an autopsy. It's true. I talked to Gus's family. They were as puzzled about the death as we were, but they couldn't stand the thought of his body being cut up and taken apart in an autopsy. Let him rest, is what they said. I asked them what the doctors said. Apparently they didn't say much either. The docs had no answers. They said it was likely his heart, even though he had no history of health problems. Sometimes these things happen, the doc said. I went through Gus's cases too. In our business, you never know. There could be a client who didn't like an outcome or didn't think he was being represented well. It's a sad statement, but people are crazy these days. I combed through all his files, talked to all his clients. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary there either. Gus wasn't involved in any controversial cases. They were all routine affairs, and his clients were happy with his work. I talked with the newspaper too. Asked the reporter who wrote the piece on Gus whether there was anything amiss since she spent a couple days with him. Again, I got nowhere. No leads, no clues. I was stumped. Maybe the docs were right. These things just happen sometimes. Sitting there in the Daily Journal's editorial offices, staring at that photo of Gus, tapping my chin, trying to figure out who to talk to next, that's when I noticed it. Something seemed off in that photo. Gus seemed off. I couldn't quite figure it out. Wasn't sure what it was, but Gus looked shrunken, I guess. Smaller. It's the best way I could describe it. Maybe it was the angle or the camera lens, I didn't know, but I thought it best to talk to the photographer. We hired a freelancer, the reporter told me. Budget cuts forced the Daily Journal to cut back on most of their full-time photographers, so now they hired freelancers by the hour. Journalism must be in a really sorry state when a local paper can't afford photographers, I thought. So I asked the reporter for the photographer's details. He's kind of a weird one, the reporter said, as she handed me a phone number and an email address. A weird one? That's interesting. What do you mean? I asked. Tweaky, I guess I'd say. He's got these nervous tics. He's kind of hard to work with, but Gus was very kind to him. I do know that. From the other side of the cubicle wall, a head popped up, like one of those moles in a whack-a-mole game. You talking about Brent Stevens? Who? I asked the eavesdropper. Yeah, Brent, the reporter says. Who's Brent? I ask. The reporter opens her mouth to answer, but the eavesdropper cuts her off. Brent is a weird one. Used to work here, but he was fired. Tweaky is a great way to describe him, as Rose said. Ever since we used him as a freelancer, he comes in with this arsenal of equipment. Takes hours to set up. Then he uses this old ratty camera. I don't know why. I'm glad the guy was fired. Seems like this photographer might be a guy worth talking to. I emailed and called Brent, but got no response. I tried every day for a week, but no dice. Without any other leads, I decided to dig into this Brent guy some more. Now, the Daily Journal couldn't legally give me his employment details, but I asked around and pretty much got the same as what I heard from that whack-a-mole in the cubicle. He's a weird guy, nervous tics, takes way too long to set up with that old camera. I dug into his previous assignments. It seems like his photos changed over the years. I suppose that's natural as people perfect their craft, but when he was an employee, his photos seemed crisper, sharper. Then, since he was fired and taken on as a freelancer, People started looking squished, like Gus looked. I asked the Daily Journal's editors their thoughts. They agreed his quality had gone down. They said they didn't really pay attention before. Said they're a small paper in a small town. People don't expect Pulitzer quality. They also said there was nothing on their end that could explain the way those people looked. They didn't do anything special to the photos during layout. They didn't change the aspect ratios or even crop the photos. I decided to look into the background of the people he photographed, especially the ones squished like Gus. The earlier photos, when he was an employee of the Daily Journal, those people were just fine. But the ones in those squished photos, I couldn't believe it. They died too. Out of nowhere, poof, they kicked the bucket, just like Gus. One of them was an elderly gentleman, gently passed in his sleep, his obit read. 4 others were younger, like Gus, supposedly perfectly healthy until they died. But not everyone. The recent photos, the ones taken after Gus, those people were still alive. There were 3 of them, Mary Jones, Phil Worthington, and Maxine Stansberry. My next leads. Mary and Phil couldn't tell me much. Just a photo shoot, both of them said. I asked them specifics about the photographer. Did he say something or did he do something? They both said no, nothing out of the ordinary, but neither had been photographed for the newspaper before, so it was all new to them. Fortunately, Maxine was a wealth of information. A portly woman with long, unkempt hair and a wine belly that stuck out further than her breasts. She told me she dabbled in photography as a hobby, so she was really excited to get pictures taken by a professional. She said she peppered Brent with questions. All through the setup and the shoot, she asked question after question. She says she was especially interested in the camera he was using. She had herself a Sony A5 and she thought a professional would be using something better. But Brent had some old camera. The thing seemed ancient. Maxine said she was surprised it even worked. Brent told Maxine that he bought the camera from the local camera shop. Apparently it was broken when he bought it, but Brent said he fixed it. I remember his words, Maxine said. Fixed it good, better than good. That's what he said. He had this look about him when he said it too. And then he licked his lips, corner of his mouth, I think. He had this smile, I don't know, he was just a weird one. I thanked Maxine. It wasn't too much to go on, but it was more than what I had. An old camera could explain why Gus and the others looked a little funny, but that didn't explain the deaths. The following week, Mary died. The paper didn't say how she died. I reached out to her family, but they didn't want to talk. Too shook up, they said. It was all so sudden, they said. It was happening again. Someone was photographed by this Brent guy, and then they died. Why? I tried to get somewhere with the police again, but they said there was no foul play in any of these deaths. Nothing suspicious. I was incredulous. I told them they were all photographed and all in the paper. They shrugged and gave me the people die line again. A few weeks later, Phil died. This was no coincidence. Something was happening to these people. But what? I looked again at their photos. There had to be something I was missing. Something that everyone was missing. I read through their articles again to see if there was a connection. Mary was pictured with her award-winning apple pie. Phil was photographed showing off his coin collection. I went through every single person photographed by Brent since he was fired. Every single one of these people died. Nothing connected them, other than being in the paper. And even then, it was different reporters doing the stories. Nothing was the same. Nothing but the photographer. Gus dies, Mary dies, Phil. That's the order they were featured in the paper. That had to be significant. I looked at the dates their photos were published, and as best I could work it out, there was no pattern there. Sure, they were in order, but their dates didn't match. The only thing that seemed of significance was they all died within 3 months of getting that photograph. I asked the Daily Journal for the exact dates of the photo sessions. After some back and forth and grumbling from their record keeper, I got what I was after. 80 days. It flashed at me like a big Vegas neon sign. 80 days. Every single one of the people who died, they were photographed 80 days before they died. 80 days and not a day more. How? How could this be happening? I called back Maxine, the one who gave me the details about the camera. She was on day 76. If I was correct, she'd be dead in 4 days. I didn't want to scare her, so I didn't mention anything about her dying. She hadn't been paying attention to the obituaries like I was, so she was totally ignorant about the other deaths. I asked her if she would accompany me to the camera store. I said I wanted more details about the camera Brent used, and I didn't know the first thing about photography. At the camera store, Maxine described the camera. She said it was ancient looking, something she's never seen before, big and clunky, a real antique, she said. The camera store guy knew immediately what she was talking about. He said it was a Kodak Brownie 127, which was badged as a Brownie Starlet in the US. He says he bought the camera from some curio shop in New York City. Said he got it cheap since it was broke, and then he resold it for twice what he paid. Said he was going to charge even more, but he knew Brent. Brent was a loyal customer, so he gave him a deal. Maxine asked, how do you fix a camera like that, and how do you get parts? The shopkeeper shrugged, said he had no idea how you could fix something so old. Would it make people look squished? I asked. Could be. It was old. The lens was totally shot. Nothing like the quality you get today. Hell, nothing like the quality that was around in the 60s either. I have no idea how or why Brett wanted it other than as a collector's item, maybe. We thanked the man and left. I quizzed Maxine a bit more, trying to get her to remember if anything else was out of the ordinary. Was there anything else about Brent? Was there something he did or said? I had my answers, I guessed, about the squished people in the photographs. Brent used the old piece of shit camera, but it didn't explain the deaths. There had to be something else. Maxine had no new details. She said he was just a weird guy with nervous tics. He didn't smile much until he took the photo. Supposedly he said something to her about love and how it'll turn out. Wait and see, he said. I didn't think words like that coming from a photographer were anything out of the ordinary. I went home that night and did some more research. I googled photos and death. A bunch of selfie takers who fell off a ledge at the Grand Canyon or other places came up. Not what I was looking for. But then I came across something else. Well, someone else. Harvey Glattman. He was a serial killer in the late 50s, the glamour girl slayer. He would lure women under the guise of being a photographer, say he's going to take pictures of them, then tie them up, sexually assault and kill them. Taking pictures the whole time. A real sick son of a bitch. Could Brent be like Harvey? Maybe, but it didn't make much sense. Harvey tied up and killed women. He was a sexual deviant in the truest sense of the word, getting into things like autoerotic asphyxiation when he was 12. What I had was a photojournalist with a nervous tic and people dying 80 days after he photographed them with an old camera. He didn't do anything like tying people up or even focusing on women. He just took the jobs he was given. It's just, people ended up dead with no explanation. But still, Harvey's story of rape, murder, and destruction was the closest thing I had to anything that made sense. Maxine had 3 days left. I went back to the Daily Journal, said I really needed to talk to Brent, but I couldn't get a hold of him. Neither can we, the editor said. We got a shoot in 2 days and we've already paid him for it, so we're hoping he shows. Maxine, 2 days left. I had to let her in on what I found, the 80 days, her impending death. It wouldn't be fair to let her check out to the great beyond without getting her affairs in order. If I was gonna die, I would want to know, wouldn't you? I gave Maxine all the information I had. She thanked me and told me a story. I never thought I'd die before I reached 50, she said. I'm so close to 49. 49 and I'm gonna kick the bucket. I never really thought about my life before and when I would die. I just took things day after day, taking for granted the morning sunshine, the friendly hello from a stranger at the checkout line. Those are the things I'll miss. These are the little things that make life enjoyable. But I'm not scared of death. I got over my fear of death a long time ago. There's something I never talk about with anyone. My family knows, but that's it. Not something I really want to bring up with people. It's my brother, Ken. He died when I was 10, drowned in a neighbor's swimming pool. It took me years to get over that. Ken and I used to fight a lot as kids. Well, I think it was more me fighting with him. He just wanted to be left alone, wanted me to stop bossing him around, stop telling him to brush his teeth. Ken was 2 years older than me, black sheep of the family though. I didn't know that then. My parents were always yelling at him. And then there was me. I was the little angel of the family. Ken could do nothing right. I could do nothing wrong. The last thing I remember with Ken is my parents yelling at him to pick up his socks. He was always leaving socks on the floor, telling him to be a man, to grow up. I got on his case too, just like my parents. I said his feet stink and he's disgusting. That's when Ken slammed the door and left for the neighbor's house. The coroner couldn't tell us if it was suicide or an accidental drowning. I guess it didn't matter much. He was dead and that was enough. It took me 5 years to get over that hole in my heart. 5 years to accept the reality of death, to come to terms with the concept of life ending. So you tell me my life ends in 2 days? I say thank you. Now I can be reacquainted with my brother and my parents. Life hasn't been worth living without family, and I've got none except in heaven, just a few friends now. So if Brent really is some killer, if he's going out and doing what you say he's doing, well, I'm not going to cry about it. Maxine may not be crying about it, but I was. The idea that her life would end with the snap of a finger at 80 days, just like the others, it was enough to make me sick to my stomach. It wasn't right. Something had to be done about it. I called the Daily Journal and pried out Brent's next assignment. They didn't want to tip their hand to what they're working on, but a couple of Benjamins in the right hand did wonders. Brent was scheduled to take photographs of some homeowners over on 180th Street. They won some big legal fight with their HOA. The shoot was tomorrow, the day Maxine was scheduled to die. I called Maxine. What time did Brent take photos of you? Maxine let out a big sigh. Why? Why does it matter? You said I'd die tomorrow. Maxine sounded resigned to her fate, depressed even. This wasn't the same person that gave me the stoic speech and a stiff upper lip. Maybe I shouldn't have told her my theory about her future. Yeah, but maybe we can stop it. Get to Brent. He's got a photo shoot tomorrow. It's our best bet. There's something going on, or there's something he's doing, something with that camera. It's not a coincidence. Another sigh from Maxine. Let me be. Let me spend my final days surrounded by my friends. Maxine, please. I can't do this alone. After another 5 minutes of pleading, Maxine finally relented. It was 3:30 p.m. when that photo was taken. I remember looking at my watch. That was the time. We approached the house Brent was supposed to be at 3 hours before the photo shoot was to begin. According to Maxine, Brent showed up more than an hour ahead of time to get set up. He put up fancy lights and diffusers and arranged it all like it was a movie set, even making sure things like pillows were in the proper place. Then he put that old camera on the tripod. The only thing missing was the makeup, Maxine said. If my theory was correct, and Maxine bit the bullet at 3:30 p.m., the same time her photo was taken, we wouldn't have much wiggle room. Today's photo shoot was scheduled for 3. Brent better not be late. On the drive over, we devised our plan. We would tell the homeowners, Frank and Nancy Templeton, that we were from the Daily Journal. We would ask Nancy and Frank if we could take their place, pretend we were them. The story would be that we're from the newspaper's quality control, and we wanted to check on Brent's work, as things have been a bit suspect lately. We said this is done to make sure the public was getting the best journalism possible from its local newspaper. Of course, we'll tell them, if the shoot starts off fine, and there's no reason it shouldn't be fine, we'll swap out and they can take their original spots. They'll still get the photos in the paper. Nancy and Frank were an agreeable couple, and they agreed right away when we explained the situation. Anything to help the local news, Nancy said. I absolutely love the Daily Journal. It's the first thing I read with my coffee. With Nancy and Frank in their bedroom upstairs, Maxine and I waited. It was just as Maxine said. Brent was about an hour early. He showed up carrying 3 bags plus a backpack, enough gear for a Spielberg movie. We had just short of 2 hours to find out what the hell was going on and stop it before Maxine gave up the ghost. Brent was different than I imagined him to be. He was maybe $150 soaking wet, about a head shorter than me too, and I'm no colossus at 5'10". The guy looked like a poster child for the least likely to succeed in the high school yearbook. His nervous tics were evident right from the initial handshake. He would turn his head in a jerky fashion every couple minutes, while his tongue simultaneously touched the corner of his lips. It was uncomfortable standing there while he jerked and licked. Though he wasn't mentally handicapped, you could tell he was a few fries short of a Happy Meal. I could understand why the cubicle whack-a-mole was happy to see him go. I tried some chit-chat with Brent as he set up, but he was a man of few words. Yep, the weather's nice. Yep, what a game last night. Yep, this won't take much longer. He wouldn't take any of the bait, just give me these pithy sentences while twitching his head and licking the side of his mouth. Then Maxine chimed in, asking about his gear, specifically the old camera on the tripod. He glanced up from adjusting his light modifier and squinted at Maxine. Have we met before? Shit, I didn't think of that. I never thought about Brent remembering taking photographs of Maxine. I'm so stupid. What is that camera? I quickly interjected as I got up off my stool and walked to the old Kodak, trying to do something to get his eyes off Maxine. Don't touch that! Brett snapped as I ran my fingers along the camera's bulky plastic. There was anger in Brent's voice. He didn't like me touching his camera. I looked Maxine's way. She looked pale. Her eyes were looking a bit glossy, too. I looked at my watch. 2:40 p.m. I needed answers. Maxine needed answers. We had less than an hour until she passed away. You don't see him like this anymore, I said, crouching down, inspecting the camera like it was a diamond. It had to be this camera. Something about this camera. It was the only thing out of place. No one used a camera like this anymore. But I couldn't tell what or how it worked. How would a camera like this kill people? I eyeballed every inch of the thing. This thing do good photos? I asked. Oh, it does the best photos I've ever done, Brett said with a sly smile and a lick of his mouth. That was a bullshit answer if I've ever heard one. This camera was trash. A Nokia flip phone could take better photos than this thing. Tell me how it works. You just press here? I pointed the camera at him and put my finger on the shutter release button. No, don't touch that, Brett said as he leaped my direction, pushing me away from the camera with enough force that I fell on my butt. Maxine didn't react. She was slumped over, looking like a druggie on a stoop. I checked my watch. She had 30 minutes to live. I didn't have time to play Inspector Gadget anymore. I needed answers. Maxine needed answers. Gus needed answers. They all did. The family of those who lost someone because this weirdo and whatever he was doing. You son of a bitch, how you doing it? I got up slowly, bracing myself for him to come at me. I looked up and saw the real Frank and Nancy peeking out their bedroom, trying to figure out what the hell was going on in their dining room downstairs. Brett hovered over his camera like it was a child. Do what? I'm just a cameraman, a simple photographer. He twitched his head and licked the side of his mouth like a lizard. You're killing people, I said. I don't know how you're doing it, but you're killing people. Gus Samuelson, Mary Jones, Phil Worthington. Anyone you photograph seems to die. I pointed. Maxine Stansberry. Brent looked at Maxine's direction. I knew I recognized you. 25 minutes to live now. She looked like hell. Her forehead sweaty, her body lifeless, barely hanging on to that stool. Well, I guess it's time, isn't it? Brett said. So you know, I squealed. Brett pivoted my way and put his hand on the camera. Say cheese. I charged at him, a full-on bull rush. Before my hands could reach his chest, my eyes were blinded. The camera went off, a point-blank flash that had me seeing spots. My momentum carried me forward, tumbling into the camera, knocking it over, continuing straight into Brent. We went down hard, as did the camera. Frank and Nancy came out of their bedroom but didn't dare set foot into the carnage downstairs. Brent and I rolled around on the hardwood floor, grabbing at each other. Him trying to break free, me trying to keep him from escaping. It was Maxine. She was swaying, teetering on the edge of the stool, about to fall flat on her face. As I held down Brent, I glanced at my watch. Maxine had 20 minutes to live. My countdown was on too after that camera snapped my photo. It's over, I yelled at Brent, pinning his shoulders under my knees, putting all my weight on him so he couldn't move. He thrashed his head, twitching and licking, twitching and licking. How'd you kill those people? How do I save Maxine? I thought of Gus and the others. None of them deserved to die. The smiles in their pictures showed off a moment in time, a joyous moment. An award-winning apple pie, a legal accommodation, a coin collection. These were proud people, happy to share and be noticed. I'm sure they cut out the newspaper clip and hung it on their wall at home. But then this psycho Brent put an end to all that. Whack! A loud cracking thud. I looked at the stool. It was empty. Maxine went down hard. From the sickening sound, it sounded like it was skull first, no hands out for protection. Her body was lifeless on the floor. She was either out cold or dead. I thought she had 10 minutes left, but who knows? She could have gotten the time she was photographed wrong. I looked at Brent with his twitchy head and his licking mouth, and I didn't hesitate to punch him right in the nose. You bastard, how'd you do it? Brent licked the blood coming from his nostrils and spit it at me. I punched him again. I don't have time for this shit. Fess up! Brett smiled. I guess your time's up soon anyways. It's too late for her, he said, motioning his head in Maxine's direction. Let me ask you a question, Mr. Fuck you, you don't get the benefit of knowing my name. Tell me how you did it. How'd you kill these people? Brett twitched and licked and smiled. Tell me or I smash your precious camera to bits. Brett winced at the thought of his camera in pieces. Then he cleared his throat. Humans take more than 1.4 trillion pictures a year, he said. Moments in time, frozen forever. Frozen smiles, frozen waterfalls, frozen dogs wagging their tails. Did you know natives thought cameras stole your soul? It's true. In fact, there's churches in Central America that still don't allow photographs on their wall because of this belief. Well, you see, my camera's a bit like that. Let's just say the camera has certain powers. And here's something else with cameras. Did you know people used to take photos of the dead? Death photos? They would pose with a loved one, maybe gathering together in the living room with the dead on the floor. A memento. Dead memories, I guess you could call it. It was a popular thing in Victorian England. I was growing tired of Brent's bullshit history lesson. How does it kill people? Tell me! Brent gave a double lick to the side of his mouth and continued. I'm a tinkerer. I like to create things, fix things. Especially camera gear. You know, I have a lot of time on my hands since the Daily Journal fired me. I put this old Kodak into working order from a bunch of different parts I had laying around. The lens is still screwed up, but no one seems to mind. I didn't know my camera was special, not at first. As I mentioned, I cobbled it back into working order using different parts. Some of the parts I used were from a camera I took death photos with, like the ones I mentioned. It's not necessarily legal in all states, but there's a brisk underground business for that sort of thing. Being a photographer doesn't pay much, you know. I can't tell you why what happens, but it does. Somehow with the parts of the camera that I take death photos with in this old Kodak, it's like death was imprinted on it. I got worried at first and wasn't sure it was real. But then after I got fired, after hearing my editor say, "You don't bring profit," I'm so fed up with this fucking place. I use the camera all the time now. Any freelance job I get from the Daily Journal, fuck them all. You people are all the same. Do you bring profit? Brent spit at me for emphasis, and I had to dodge to avoid his saliva blood. I would have laughed at the guy for such a fantastical story if we didn't have a trail of dead bodies, if we didn't have Maxine lying motionless a few yards away. "Why 80 days, I asked. What's so special about that?" Brent laughed, a sadistic, uncaring, high-pitched laugh that was broken up by his twitching and licking. 80 days means nothing as best I can figure. My guess is that's when my negatives get destroyed. I don't keep them anymore. I got so many damn photos over the years, shoot after shoot. So I turn over what I got to a recycling company. My guess is when people dispose of the negatives, that's when people die. I've tried it myself too. If someone really pisses me off, I'll just take that negative out and cut it right up. I guess the natives were right about cameras taking souls after all. He gave another deranged laugh. This one so hard I could feel his belly moving up and down underneath me. "That's it, I'm calling the police!" It was Frank's voice, the real Frank. I forgot they were upstairs watching this whole time. "I don't care," Brent said, continuing his laughter. "I'm done with this fucking world." I gave another punch to his already bloody nose, this one hard enough that I heard it crunch. His head jerked backwards, thumping onto the hardwood floor. As I got off him, I grabbed his camera and pointed it in his direction. "No, Brent, now you're done with this fucking world," I said as I clicked the camera shutter button.